CSF is partly absorbed by lymphatics around which cranial nerves? Tremor associated with cerebellar lesions, seen predominantly in extremities, occurs ipsilateral to lesion and has coarse, irregular quality. A lesion involving an entire cerebral peduncle would result in the degeneration of fibers originating from cell bodies in which of the following areas: globus pallidus, cerebellar nuclei, and cerebral cortex. Which nerves does not arise from the medulla? Facial. All are nuclei of the basal ganglia except dentate nuclei. So, which are the nuclei of the basal ganglia? Caudate nucleus, amygdaloid nucleus, and lentiform nucleus. The spinal nerve pair are 31 pairs. In an adult, the spinal cord ends at the level of lower border of L1. In the newborn, the spinal cord ends at L3. Following are the branches of basilar artery, pontine and labyrinthine. Frontal eye motor area is 9, 6, and 8. Fibers passing through posterior column is fasciculus gracilis. Pupillary reflex pathway includes all except lateral geniculate body. So pupillary reflex pathway includes retina, Edinger-Westphal nucleus, and pretectal areas. Dentate nucleus is a part of cerebellum. The central canal of the spinal cord is central in region of lumbar. The cisterna of the lateral sulcus contains middle meningeal artery. Which of the following is not a part of epithalamus? Geniculate bodies is not a part of epithalamus. Which are the parts of epithalamus? Pineal body, posterior commissure, and trigonum habenule. All of the following arteries supply medulla oblongata except anterior inferior cerebellar artery. So, which arteries supply medulla oblongata? Posterior inferior cerebellar artery, spinal artery, and vertebral artery. Nucleus and brain common to 9, 10, and 11 cranial nerve is nucleus ambiguous. Which nucleus is not found in the floor of the fourth ventricle? Facial nerve. Purkinje cells from which nucleus is found in the floor of the fourth ventricle? Abducens, dorsal vagal nuclei, and hypoglossal nerve. Purkinje cells from the cerebellum end in cerebellar nuclei. Fibers of acoustic radiation arise in the medial geniculate body. Broca's area is 44 and 45. Cerebral aqueduct, that is duct of Sylvius, which is true. It connects third and fourth ventricle. Fibers passing through crus cerebri are corticonuclear and corticospinal fibers. The inferior cerebellar peduncle has all the following tracts except pontocerebellar. So the inferior cerebellar peduncle has which tract? Vestibulocerebellar, olivocerebellar, and spinocerebellar. Pretectal nucleus is responsible for light reflex. About blood-brain barrier, following is true. It is destroyed by inflammation, irradiation, and tumor. Interpeduncular fossa contains all except ophthalmic nerve. So interpeduncular fossa contains mammillary bodies, posterior perforated substance, and oculomotor nerve. Basal ganglion contains all except thalamus. So basal ganglia contains globus pallidus, putamen, and lentiform nucleus. Unpaired structure in the brain is basilar artery. Complete sulcus is calcarine sulcus. Efferent from cochlear nucleus arise for superior olivary nucleus. Auditory transmission is via lateral lemniscus. Oligodendrocytes are important in myelin formation. Middle cerebellar peduncle transmits fibers of pontocerebellar pathway. Artery or arteries supplying occipital cortex is middle cerebral artery and posterior cerebral artery. Fibers which pass through genu of internal capsule are corticonuclear fibers. Optic tract is related to lateral geniculate body. Lesion of medial temporal lobe is associated with auditory amnesia. Unilateral trigeminal nerve injury is tested by elevation and lowering of jaw and corneal reflex. Auditory pathway passes through medial geniculate body. Great vein of Galen is formed by internal cerebral vein. Which of the following tract is seen in the posterior column of spinal cord? Fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Branch of basilar artery include posterior cerebral. Which of the following is the ventral posterior nucleus of thalamus? Medial lemniscus, spinothalamic, and trigeminal lemniscus. The mammillothalamic tract terminates in which one of the following nuclei in the thalamus? Anterior nucleus. The following tract enter the cerebellum through inferior cerebellar peduncle except anterior spinocerebellar tract. So which tract entered the cerebellum through inferior cerebellar peduncle? Posterior spinocerebellar tract, stria medullaris, and anterior external arcuate fibers. Which of the following is not a branch of basilar artery? Anterior interconnecting cerebral artery and posterior communicating artery are not the branches of basilar artery. Labyrinthine artery and pontine artery are the branches of basilar artery. Which of the following thalamic nuclei does not project to neocortex? Reticular nuclei. So, which thalamic nuclei project to neocortex? Intralaminar nuclei, pulvinar nuclei, and anterior thalamic nuclei. Which of the following nuclei belongs to the general visceral efferent column, dorsal nucleus of vagus? Blood-brain barrier is formed by astrocytes. Tectal braking is seen in Arnold-Chiari malformation. Central sulcus is an example of limiting sulcus. All are true statement about spinal cord except coccygeal ligament is investing layer of dura over filum terminale is wrong. So dural sac ends at S2 vertebra, cord ends at lower border of L1, and filum terminate and extends up to coccyx. Myelin sheath in the central nervous system is formed by oligodendrocytes. Cerebellopontine angle contains all except 12th cranial nerve. So it contains medullo-olivary tract. Which area is out of the blood-brain barrier? Area postrema is out of the blood-brain barrier. Support of the muscles against gravity is a function of which of the following? Reticular nuclei. Through which part of internal capsule does auditory pathway pass? Sublentiform part. Which of the following does not give rise to arteries supplying the spinal cord? Thoracoacromial artery. And which arteries give rise to arteries supplying the spinal cord? Ascending cervical artery, deep cervical artery, and intercostal arteries. The structure which is not a component of basal ganglia is thalamus. So what are the components of basal ganglia? Caudate of basal ganglia, putamen, and globus pallidus. Sensation not represented in sensory cortex is pain and temperature. So which sensation are represented in sensory cortex? Touch and olfaction. Nucleus ambiguous include all except cranial nerve. Superior colliculus is concerned with vision. Posterior communicating artery is a branch of internal carotid artery. The structure that passes between middle cerebellar peduncle and pons is trigeminal nerve. The constituent of inferior cerebellar peduncle includes all except anterior spinocerebellar. So the constituent of inferior cerebellar peduncle includes cuneo-cerebellar, olivocerebellar, and parvo parolivocerebellar. Hypoglossal nucleus lies on medulla. Thrombosis of the following cerebral vessels leading to the hemiplegia by middle cerebral. Which of the following is not a branch of intracranial part of internal carotid artery? Anterior communicating. Pupillary light reflex related with all except superficial longitudinal association tract. So pupillary light reflex is related with retina, pretectal nucleus, and Edinger-Westphal nucleus. All of the following cranial nerves contain somatic efferents except seventh nerve, that is facial nerve. Facial colliculus is seen in pons. Which is the nucleus of mesenteric reflex? Mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve. What is true about spinal cord? In adult, spinal cord ends at lower border of L1 vertebrae. In newborn, may extend up to L3. Cauda equina extends from lumbar vertebrae to coccyx. Genu of internal capsule carries corticonuclear tract. The structure that passes between middle cerebellar peduncle and pons is trigeminal nerve. Which of the following is not a branch of maxillary branch of internal carotid artery? Posterior tympanic. Visual area of cortex is supplied by posterior cerebral artery. Structures not passing through inferior cerebellar peduncle is pontocerebellar and anterior spinocerebellar. Which of the following brainstem nuclei is derived from the alar plate? Hypoglossal. Medulla oblongata is supplied by the following arteries except bulbar artery. So medulla oblongata is supplied by anterior spinal artery, basilar artery, and posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Which cranial nerve affects equilibrium? vestibulocochlear nerve. Structure not passing through inferior cerebellar peduncle is pontocerebellar and anterior spinocerebellar. So which structure pass through inferior cerebellar peduncle? Cuniocerebellar and olivocerebellar and vestibulocerebellar. The rhombencephalon includes all except midbrain. So rhombencephalon includes pons, medulla oblongata and cerebellum. Some areas in or near the brain stem situated outside the blood-brain barrier are area postrema, organum vasculosum of lamina terminalis and posterior pituitary and subfornical organ. Trigeminal nuclei is the main sensory nucleus located in pons. Mesencephalic nucleus is made up of unipolar neuron and motor nucleus is located in pons. The trapezoid body is concerned with hearing. All of the following arteries supply medulla oblongata except anterior inferior cerebellar artery. Which of the following cranial nerve does not contain parasympathetic motor fibers? Sixth cranial nerve. What is true about corpus callosum? It unites far area of two side of brain. It connects two frontal lobe, unite two hemisphere, and superiorly related to indusium griseum, unite adjacent and widespread gyri in the same lobe. Pain insensitive structure in the brain is choroid plexus. Cerebellar glomeruli are seen in granular. Deep venous system of brain consists of internal cerebral vein, great cerebral vein and basal vein. All of the following form the floor of third ventricle except oculomotor nerve. So which structure form the floor of third ventricle? Infundibulum, mammillary body and optic chiasma. Floor of the fourth ventricle contains all except facial nucleus. So floor of fourth ventricle contains abducent nucleus, dorsal vagal nucleus and hypoglossal nucleus. Posterior communicating artery is a branch of internal carotid artery. Nucleus ambiguous does not include 7th nerve nucleus, it includes 9th, 10th and 11th nerve nucleus. Vertebral artery passes through foramen of transverse process of all except 7th cervical vertebrae. Nucleus ambiguous is related to all cranial nerve except